The Cincinnati Bengals have a lot to do this offseason. Let's try to prioritize that offseason to-do list.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals here on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcasts. And so if you're new to the show, you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode, as we'll have you covered as the Bengals continue their defensive coordinator search, and we get into some offseason priorities for the first time, as playoff games are still going on for the first time in 2025. Welcome back to the Everydayers as well. We appreciate all of you who don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals, and all of you who make us your first listen. That's a great habit to have here. We appreciate y'all as well. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel, where if you win your first $5 bet, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Check it out at FanDuel.com to get started. And James, before we dive into the honey-do list for the Cincinnati Bengals this offseason and the priorities that they have to reshape certain areas of this team that are pretty obvious, we'll give a quick update on the defensive coordinator search since the last time you heard from us. The biggest change is that some of the Bengals interviews have been reportedly completed, and Matt Eberflus has entered the chat, James.
He has, and the question is how much? How serious is this? Is this interest on both sides? Is an interview so imminent that by the time people hear this, Matt Eberflus has interviewed for the defensive coordinator job? We had some weather here in Cincinnati last week. Maybe that delayed the travel plans. I wouldn't have tried to fly in to CBG during different parts of last week. So who knows? But Matt Eberflus, former defensive coordinator of the Colts, obviously most recently was the head coach of the Chicago Bears, was fired on November 29th. He fits the description and a lot of the qualities that I think the Bengals are looking for from an experience standpoint, from having success turning over a defense, and just asking around the league. He's certainly well respected for his ability to develop players. So there is a chance, I would say, that he would fit the description of what they're looking for.
Yeah, credited in Indianapolis in particular, the work he did that got him a head coaching job for player development, for suiting his defense to his players, to his personnel, and for being sound, generally speaking. And if you are consistently fielding a sound defense that follows its rules and sometimes knows the offense's rules better than the offense does and can use those to their advantage, and that is certainly a sign of a good defense in today's NFL, that does sound like the kind of defensive coordinator that the Bengals could be looking for. We're talking about a floor raiser, potentially, if everything goes according to plan, because you never know with these coaches. A floor raiser, certainly something they're looking for, someone who can develop talent, someone who can put guys in positions to maximize their talents. That sounds on paper like what Matt Eberflus has done in previous stops. He's also had good results, like you mentioned, taking the Colts defense from 30th the year before he arrived to 10th when he arrived. I think it was in scoring defense in that metric. Also going to be a top 11 defense right away in yardage allowed in his first year in Indy. The before-after splits that people pointed to in EPA per play for Robert Saleh also exist for Eberflus with the Bears defense as head coach. And while it was a terrible tenure for Eberflus as the head coach in Chicago, it's easy to look around the league and find examples of guys who couldn't do it as head coaches but are still really good coordinators. And the most prominent example for Bengals fans to think about, well, there's two probably. I think the modern example, Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, a guy who did not have success as a head coach but has figured it out as a defensive coordinator and is now seen as one of the best in the league. Another one is Dick LeBeau, who, of course, didn't work out in Cincinnati, but was a great defensive coordinator for the Steelers.
And Robert Saleh, Dennis Allen, Brandon Staley, like all these guys that a lot of people want. Well, Matt Eberflus fits that same mold. And so we'll see. I think it's interesting. I went back and pulled a quote because I was curious. I was like, oh, well, they had that joint practice with the Bears. Maybe Zach and Matt are tight. And Zach was like, yeah, I don't really know him that well, but we've been communicating. And this was in August. We've been communicating since May and ironing out the plans and all of those things. But who knows? Like maybe there's something there. And that's why the reporting on this, as of us recording right now, is that Matt Eberflus is involved in the Bengals defensive coordinator search. I used in the mix when I wrote the story. Like, I don't know what that means necessarily, but hopefully he gets an interview. That's what I would want, is if you're intrigued by anyone, or like anyone you're intrigued by, interview them. It can't hurt. It's more information, and you have to get this hire right if you're the Bengals.
Yeah, agreed. Obviously, it's the first thing they have to do on that offseason to-do list, because many of the topics that we're going to discuss to follow will have a lot to do with whoever is involved at DC. Speaking of whoever is involved, the Bengals did reportedly complete interviews with Patrick Graham and with DeMarcus Covington, a couple of former Patriots, and other stops for Graham, defensive coordinators. Graham most recently, of course, in Las Vegas, and also getting a head coaching interview with the Jaguars, was it?
Yep.
Make sure I have that right. But Patrick Graham also getting some interest as a head coach in this cycle as well, which I found interesting because he's just reportedly done his interview for the Bengals DC job as well.
Yeah, I think Patrick Graham is an intriguing candidate, someone that, at least in NFL circles, is thought of as if they hire him, they're going to say, all right, well, he's going to be able to maximize Myles Murphy. His defensive line expertise is going to be able to really help him develop and grow. And he's going to get the most out of some of these young guys and embrace the facelift that this defense has undergone over the past couple of years, and will continue to do this offseason. And there will be plenty of new faces that line up for the 2025 Bengals that were not in stripes in 2024. So, yeah, I think that one is a name to watch. And with Covington, he's a defensive line guy. Was the Patriots defensive line coach for multiple years. I think 3 to 4 years. Was a first-time defensive coordinator for the Patriots this past year. What I wonder, maybe you go with Patrick Graham as DC and Covington as defensive line coach. Like that would not shock me if it went that route. I'm not saying it's going to go that route, but I look at Covington's profile, and who knows, maybe he just crushes it and ends up being the defensive coordinator. But I think he fits all right, well, Patrick Graham well, come be the defensive line coach, and we'll have Graham coach the defense and be defensive coordinator. So I could see that path, and maybe that's what they're exploring.
Incidentally, there was no overlap between DeMarcus Covington and Patrick Graham in New England. Patrick Graham left in 2015. Yeah. DeMarcus Covington arrived in 2017.
And Graham has been around. Like, it's not like he's just a New England guy. Like, he's been with the Giants, been with the Dolphins, obviously been with the Raiders. Been with the Raiders so much so and held in such high regard that Antonio Pierce kept him on the staff last year. Mm-hmm. I do think that matters, that he did that. So regardless of the results, and the Raiders were bad for a bunch of reasons, but the one thing I would wonder, what does Max Crosby think of him? What do some of these younger defensive players that have worked with him over the past couple of years in Las Vegas, what do they think of him? And the Bengals are probably gathering all that information right now. But I do think that he's a legitimate contender, I would say, for the defensive coordinator job. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, talking about the younger players, certainly one of the keys now that has been stressed in the media, at least on Sunday when I woke up, James. I woke up to a big conversation about the hiring of Vrabel in New England and the necessity to be able to connect with these players coming out of college off of NIL deals, where there's this difference in the players arriving to the league, making money for the first time versus players arriving in the league with money, even if they are fifth round picks because they were superstars of their universities before arriving in the NFL.
Yeah, it is. That part of it is changing, and you're going to see these prospects come in. I mean, heck, the Georgia quarterback who stunk this year, to be honest, was a big reason why Georgia didn't make it to the national championship game, which that's their expectation every year. He declares for the draft. Everyone tells him he's stupid, and then Miami offers him $4 million to go there and be the quarterback for the Hurricanes. So Carson Beck's like, yeah, I'll go live in Miami for $4 million. That's better than being a 7th round pick. Yeah, so it's wild.
Bit of a different world. We'll have to see how that impacts the NFL draft as well. But coming up next, James, let's talk about some of those offseason to-dos for the Bengals, some prioritization to get into for this team. We will shift the conversation to the exciting topic of this Bengals offseason next. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire, and better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. It's a game changer when it comes to finding the right fit. And LinkedIn knows that you can be wearing a lot of hats when you're running a small business, and that's why they connect you with the best candidates using data you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn will help you find the right person for the job. And 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find quality candidates. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire with LinkedIn. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Today's show is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy the way it should be. And you want to maximize the most of these final weeks of football action this season. PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Make sure that you check out PrizePicks today. And yeah, you're listening to Locked On Bengals, which means you're going to get a special offer. You download the PrizePicks app, use code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Again, download the PrizePicks app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
A lot to do for the Cincinnati Bengals this offseason, James. And this comes a year after we called it the most important offseason in Bengals history. And perhaps that was a
I think we were right
of the moment kind of thing, but I don't think so. I don't think that was necessarily recency bias. And I'm sure there's some history buff out there, and maybe you're one of them, James, that can go back throughout the history of the Cincinnati Bengals and find an offseason that was more important. But this was a team that had in its recent history a Super Bowl run, an AFC championship run, right on the doorstep of a Super Bowl in a second straight year, lost their quarterback to an injury, and had clear veteran departures that they needed to replace last year, and clear needs for development last year. And what have we said about their results from that offseason last year several times is that they failed their most important offseason in recent history. And what happens when you push the buck down the road because you didn't hit on your free agent moves and on your draft picks? Not that they didn't hit on their draft picks, but in recent years, let's say the cumulative product has not led to the kind of development they need. You find yourself with a lot of needs again. And in this case, James, I think very clear needs for this team to address in the 2025 offseason.
Yeah, the reason why last season was so important, we saw it this year, right, is we know Jamar and Joe and T, all of those things, like they played well, and Trey, and that's where it starts this year. Is for me, number one on the to-do list. Obviously, they have to get the coaching staff right, but honestly, do they have to get the defensive coordinator down before they get an extension done with Jamar Chase? Do they have to? Do they have to get the defensive coordinator down before they get an extension done with T. Higgins or extend Trey Hendrickson? That's where my to-do list starts, outside of the coaching staff, of course, is get the big three. Obviously, Joe's done. So the big three that are available. And yeah, Jamar's under contract, Trey's under contract. Neither one of those guys is going to be happy without a deal because they're the best at what they do in the NFL, arguably. And for Trey Hendrickson, getting sacks specifically, you could argue that he's better at that than anyone else. That's strictly getting sacks. And obviously, Jamar Chase has been the best receiver in the league all year long. So that's where my to-do list starts, is extend Jamar, Make sure Trey's happy, and maybe hoppy if you want some hops, a couple beers or something. It doesn't matter to celebrate. I don't know if Trey drinks or not, but you get my point. And then get T done as well. And so those are the three guys. But even before, like, I know there's all these needs and this and that and this and that. And I'm focused inward, and I'm like, keep these guys, keep this core together, because we've seen how talented it can be and how good it can be.
I think that is the first step, is ideally getting the extensions done for Hendrickson, for Chase, and figuring it out with T. And I think that it's very clear that, given Joe Burrow's commentary and Joe Burrow's importance to this team, and the fact that the entire offense is built around what Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase can do on the football field together, that step one is keep T. If you can't keep T, figure it out quickly and trade him. And they have to wait to franchise tag him to do that. And they can't franchise tag him immediately. They could re-sign him immediately, technically speaking.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to put it with T, you cannot let him hit the open market. That's it. Right?
It feels like that would be grossly misusing a resource, an asset. If you just are like, all right, well, we tried, T. Have fun in the free agent market.
And it's a weak wide receiver, like, not even just in free agency, but draft. Like, it's not like last year. And so T is going to have more value, I would say, which is also why you would argue to pay him, right? But regardless, you can't let that guy walk.
And they're going to be paying the price of not getting any of this done last year. And this is one of the very frustrating things. But this is, I think, an instance of better late than never. I think that it does still behoove the team to pay the price, but they are paying a price because they didn't figure something out with Trey and with Jamar and with T. Higgins last year. And I know that people are discussing, the NFL rules around when you're allowed to negotiate with Trey Hendrickson, and perhaps that was part of the issue, perhaps not. But now you got an all-pro in Trey Hendrickson who wants more money. And now you've got an all-pro in Jamar Chase. Congratulations to those two for being honored by the AP as all-pros. And for the second straight year, as you mentioned, maybe the best in the NFL at getting sacks, Brandon Thorne's true sack rate features Trey Hendrickson in first place. And what Brandon Thorne does to come up with that is he watches the tape and breaks down every sack that defensive linemen have and categorizes it using his expertise in offensive line play and trench play as a cleanup sack, a coverage sack, a low-quality sack, a high-quality sack, or a rare high-quality sack. And those are weighted by the quality of the tackle that you're playing against. And Trey Hendrickson is at the top of the list for the second straight year. Last year, Brandon noted that he was tied with TJ Watt at the top of the list. This year, he edges out Myles Garrett for first place in true sack rate. So certainly, along with the all-pro honors, those price tags have gone up.
Initially, here's my thought. You tell me if I'm too high or too low. I'd offer Trey. So he's 1 year left. Oh, I need to look up the money on this year. But I would say, Trey, let's extend for 2 more years, $50 million. You think he does that?
I wonder what he thinks about his own value. I think that is a reasonable offer. The top 5 highest paid edge rushers in the NFL start at $25 million. It goes all the way up to $34 million for Nick Bosa, which is currently standing out like a sore thumb among the edge market, like making hands more money than the next guy. 25 is what Myles Garrett is doing right now. And Myles Garrett is probably going to get a new deal too. But I think that is reasonable. Trey's going into his age 31 season, and the Bengals will probably have some hesitancy there. But with 15.8 million, 16 million due to Trey in 2025, you can spread that out over 3 years with the signing bonus. I think that is reasonable, a reasonable starting point, at least for negotiations.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm thinking about Jamar, but before we get to Jamar, because everyone just already they've talked about that a lot. I would offer 4 for 100.
How does that stack up on the wide receiver market? Did you look?
We will tell you next on Locked On Bengals. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are in full swing. You got to get in on the action right now with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book for a reason. And new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. Make sure that you check out FanDuel.com right now, and you can get in on futures bets. You can. Yeah, you can look at those awards. Maybe you think Joe Burrow is going to win Comeback Player of the Year. Maybe you think that Jamar Chase is going to surprise everyone and win Offensive Player of the Year. It shouldn't be a surprise, and yet for some reason, it would be a surprise regardless. Get in on the action today by visiting FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
That number would be tied with Devonta Smith at $25 million per year. That's a
The
top
no look
15 or so salary, top 12-ish for a wide receiver. I think it would take a little bit more because there's some cap inflation going on. And I think T and his camp, even though it's a new camp, would argue that he's worth a little bit more. So it might need to be $8 million more, $4 to $8 million more over the 4 years. But I think that that's a reasonable starting point, because when he's healthy, if he's healthy for a full season, he's probably a $29 million receiver. And I think on the open market, he's probably a $29 million receiver. Yeah. But you have the opportunity to negotiate before he gets to market. And so that's one advantage you have if you're the Bengals.
I think he would make. So here would be my strategy. I think he'll make like $35 million per. I think he'll get crazy money if he hits the open market.
Jefferson money. Jefferson,
no doubt.
35. Yeah.
Because I think the Patriots will be desperate. I think the Chargers would be desperate. I think that there would be teams, maybe the Jaguars. Like there'll be teams that are just like, screw it, let's just get this guy because he's the guy to get in available now. But if you tag him at 26, close to 27 million. And you're like, all right, T, turn down 4 years, 100. I think it would be hard to do, assuming that half of it's guaranteed, right? Assuming that they actually do that. Now, if only the first year is guaranteed, that's much easier to turn down because you're making that on the tag anyway. But yeah, that's where I would start. Maybe it's 4 for 108, right? Maybe it is a couple million more, but that's the realm. And then the Chase one, just make him the first $40 million a year receiver. Do 4 for 160. Be done.
I think I looked at the math of it, and if they were, I don't remember what the numbers were anymore. I think it was around 38 based on the projected cap for 2025 to be the same percentage of the cap as Justin Jefferson. So you might have to beat it by a little bit, but you go to like 38 and a half, 39. I mean, that's in the realm of 40 then.
So that's 152. I'm getting notifications. I did the math a second ago. 38 times 4. Like that was where I was at, was 38. And then I'm like, you know what? Don't nickel and dime him. Just get him to 40. So yeah, my head was at 38, and I didn't look at the cap percentages. So well, and I would be fine with that.
And they have all of the structure of the detail of the deal that they've talked about it with Jamar's agent ad nauseum last year. They got very, very close. That should not take a terribly long time to get that done. Now, again, you are dealing with an all-pro now, but it's not like that's changing dramatically. What they're paying Jamar, what's changing dramatically, what they're paying Jamar is that they waited a year and you got salary cap inflation. And these deals are all indexed to the salary cap, which next year is currently projected by Over the Cap at $278 million, which is, I think, fairly significant. I think $30 million or so dollar increase, $20 to $30 million increase over 2024, which leads to bigger salaries, even if they're the same percentage of the salary cap, which is one, I think, pretty fair way to look at the deals that teams do over time and compare year over year. Oh yeah, it's a bigger number. Of course, it's always going to be a bigger number, but you look at what it is as a percentage of the cap. And I think that's a better way to compare than just looking at the raw numbers. That being said, the Bengals are probably looking at in the realm of $70 to $90 million in salary cap space. And that assumes that there could be cap cuts coming for Sam Hubbard, for Sheldon Rankins, for Alex Kappa, for Jermaine Pratt, for Geno Stone, for Zach Moss. Those are the obvious, to different degrees, cut candidates that save the Bengals a lot of money against the cap, leave them with minimal dead money, and give the Bengals flexibility to overhaul units where there will be new coaches. And this is something that we mentioned last week, where there are new coaches coming in on the defensive side of the ball, the defensive line coach, the offensive line coach. There's opportunity to overhaul units as well. And obviously there's a need to get the defensive line some improvements, some reinforcements, someone to go along with Trey Hendrickson as a guy that can affect the passer. And obviously there's a need on the interior offensive line at guard for the Cincinnati Bengals to improve in 2025.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's a lot of needs, and that's why they have to maximize this cap space, be aggressive, keep their good players. That's why I led with that is you want to keep those guys happy and keep them here because they're hard to replace. It's hard to get it right in free agency. It's hard to get it right in the draft. And they've gotten it right with those guys. So keep them. And the guard thing, outside of what they have in the building, guard is their biggest need for me. Their biggest. At some point, I'm going to write it. I've been thinking about it for really since the season ended. Their biggest need. What is it? The way they are, the way they play, all of those things. And this is going to be something we hammer. I mean, we're going to talk about this a lot. I really need them to upgrade guard. Whether that's taking one with the 17th pick, that can just be Kevin Zeitler. Fine, do it. I will leave. If you want to spend big money on it for the first time in franchise history, do it. I will not be mad, but I need them to fix guard. To me, it is their biggest issue because of what it does to the franchise and what it does to Joe and the impact that it can have on a week-to-week basis with how they play and then how they have to play at times. I need the guard thing to get fixed. And then obviously after that, it's very clear what's second, and that's the pass rush. You need more. And what's interesting here, Jake, is just my feeling. Yeah, you get a new defensive coordinator in here. We know this front office. This front office isn't going to say, all right, we're getting rid of 3 defensive tackles. They just drafted Chris Jenkins. They just drafted McKinley Jackson. They're going to believe in those guys. They'll obviously get rid of Sheldon Rankins. BJ Hill's a free agent. So they'll bring some guys in. But whoever they bring in at defensive coordinator, they're expecting to get more out of Chris Jenkins, more out of McKinley Jackson. And so I don't think it's going to be a complete overhaul in the defensive tackle room. Obviously, there will be new faces, though.
There's a couple of things there. On the defensive tackle room in particular, you do need to replace BJ Hill's productivity and snaps. That is your leading snap guy on the defensive interior. So they can't entirely rely on Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, especially based on what we saw from them. And there was a late season improvement for McKinley Jackson. You can't rely on those guys to be your only solution on the defensive interior. I would love to see them dip into the free agency class here. I would love to see them dip into this draft class here. Seems like a good defensive tackle draft class in comparison to last year based on my early impression of the draft class on the defensive interior. And there's some guys out there in free agency that we've liked in the draft. Milton Williams, chief among those. A lot of people are looking at the Cowboys defensive tackle as well, Osa, whose last name I'm not going to try to pronounce on the fly without getting some practice in. And then there's Levi Onwuzurike from the Detroit Lions as some potential free agent candidates. There's potential there depending on what the market looks like for those guys. And as far as guard, I do agree with you that it needs to be a priority to get better. But part of my mentality on the offensive line is the entire thing needs to figure out how to run block as well. And they have some guys that should be able to do it. And so whoever they bring into offensive coordinator, just going back to how the Texans finished off that game against the Chargers, sometimes, or the Ravens finished off the game against the Steelers. Ravens, the best running team in football, a little bit of a difference there. You need to sometimes be able to run the ball to finish off games.
Sure.
The Bengals have not been able to do that for a couple of years. And so whatever they do at guard, it does become a little multifaceted. Obviously, I agree with you. The first priority is protecting Joe Burrow. The way they want to play offense is dropping back and passing the ball out of shotgun. But you need to be able to do different things sometimes and punish light boxes when teams go to that approach against you. And so
that's why guard's their biggest need is because of that. I think I wasn't just talking about the passing element of it. Yeah.
The challenge to me there is the investment required versus the payoff that you get. And the top free agent there is Trey Smith, right? Mm-hmm. From the Kansas City Chiefs. He'll help you in the running game. but his pass blocking numbers aren't all that impressive. So while that might be the obvious big money target, when you look at just the overall free agency class, which doesn't look like a great class, by the way, it gets complicated to me because you have to find the guys that can suit your style, but can help you in the run game as well. For whatever vision the new offensive line coach / likely run game coordinator is going to bring to the Bengals in that department.
Kevin Zeitler, come
Well,
on home.
and that's the other thing is like, I again don't know the texture of the draft class super well
No,
yet,
me
but
neither.
likely I would rather they draft the best player in the first round than look for an immediate starter at guard. Because you can probably get that in the second, third round this year.
For sure. Oh, no. Well, I'm just saying if it is guard, I'm always player over position.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just clarifying that. Like, it might be a safety or a defensive lineman or even a wide receiver, which I know you were going to interject with.
No, I was going to say tight end.
On the list.
Tight end.
Could be. Good tight end class again, I think. My initial impression there. Of course, plenty of time to get to the draft, and we will get there. But safety is going to be on the list as well. A second running back is going to be on the list. We did not get to all of the things on the list, but we certainly talked about the top of the Bengals priority list as we understand it today. And tight end probably going to be on that list too, depending on what we find out about Eric Hall's recovery whenever we get an update there.
It should be. And yeah, that's the beauty. If you're still here, maybe you're a new listener, we're every day, 5 times a week. We're going to have plenty of time to discuss the Bengals offseason needs, that to-do list. It is lengthy. There's a lot of needs. And yet a team that has Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson, Jake, I think that's a heck of a place to start, which is why that to-do list starts there.
Yeah. And we'll get into some of these other topics, like how the Bengals can approach the draft. We'll get into a draft primer. These are things that are coming in the coming weeks here on Locked On Bengals as well. I have sent out initial feelers to where some of our favorite draft guests are in their preparation for this year's draft class, James. They're not ready yet, but it might be after the Senior Bowl for some of them.
Me neither.
but we will have to start thinking about it soon.
I know it.
Another
mock
thing
draft Monday soon. I know it.
Another thing we'll be watching is what we can take away from some of these playoff teams, because it's always interesting to look at the lessons you can learn there. But that is going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day.